Hi there, and welcome to International Student Scholar Services at the University of Alabama's workshop on curricular practical training and optional practical training. Today, you're joining us to learn a little bit about work eligibility options available to F1 students. And I'm assuming most of you guys are on F1 student visa status. Out of our international student population, roughly 85 to 90% of the population hold F1 visa status. And so this is really focused on that. If you don't hold that visa status and you're on this workshop, you're welcome to stick around. You may learn some things about options if you do in the future change to an F1 visa. Today, our sessions are going to be led by myself, Charter Morris. I'm Director of International Student Scholar Services, as well as Trang Nguyen, who is the International Student Scholar Advisor, mainly focusing on student advising and the person that you will work with closely for practical training authorization, as well as Chris Larkin, International Student Scholar Advisor, who mainly works with international faculty, staff, and scholars here at the University of Alabama. Let's see. Going forward, we wanted to talk a little bit about CPT. Now, as an F1 student, most of you are already working on campus. F1 students are allowed to work on campus up to 20 hours per week during the fall and spring semester, and more than 20 hours a week on campus during the breaks. However, to be able to work off campus, you need special authorization, and that authorization would fall under two different types of practical training. Now, CPT, which is the one that I'm going to talk about before handing it off to Trang to talk about optional practical training. CPT is called Curricular Practical Training, and it's important to understand that this is a temporary employment authorization that is an integral part of an established curriculum. So it's really truly tied to your degree, and the emphasis here is on curricular. It's only available before graduation, before your degree completion. It has to be directly related to your major field of study, and which is the program of study section listed on your I-20. It can't be related to a minor field. It can't be related to a previous degree that you've done or a different major that you used to take. It has to be directly related to your current major as listed on the I-20. On top of that, it is employer specific, meaning that you have to have a job offer before it can be authorized. And then it does have to be authorized by your advisor, your DSO, here in the International Student Scholar Services Office. And that authorization is reflected via a new I-20 that we will issue, which states your CPT, start date and end date, who your employer is, and whether it's been authorized for part-time or full-time employment. Now, CPT is something that comes up a lot. Now, students may have opportunities at some point to do an internship, and this may help them in their pursuit of a career later in their life. We want students to not just get their degree, but be able to have a resume that will be strong enough for them to land their full-time career. So CPT is perfect for that, and it's typically done for internship, paid or unpaid internship opportunities during their program of study. It's not intended for general ongoing work authorization. It's really meant to be limited in scope, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And really, I want to stress here that the emphasis, besides about being curricular, is that it's on training. And so training doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be paid training. Unpaid trainings, unpaid internships also require CPT authorization. So if during your degree program you are required or are recommended to do an internship that's unpaid, just because it's unpaid doesn't mean it's okay. As an F1 student, you will need to get CPT authorization. So if you're in a program that requires a field experience outside of the university, you need to get that authorization through the International Student Scholar Services Office before engaging in that in any way. Basically, if you're going to put it on your resume as work experience, if it's going to count towards qualifying you for a job opportunity in the future that may require a minimum amount of experience, you basically should consider that as something that does require practical training authorization as an F1 student. Now, what are the requirements? There aren't a lot of requirements. It just has to kind of trigger a few different categories or different checkpoints. One is F1 students have to have completed at least one academic year of study in F1 status, full-time. This would be, fall and spring semesters, or spring and summer, or summer and fall, but two sequential semesters of study. If you begin in spring, you could meet that by doing spring and summer studies, or you could do it by spring and then the following fall semester, and then you would be eligible for CPT in the subsequent spring semester. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. Not everyone is required to complete one full academic year of study. Those exceptions are made if you are in a graduate program, and if that graduate program requires that you participate in an internship in the first year of study. Now, that has to be a catalog level requirement, and there are not a lot of programs out there that do that. So it has to be explicitly written into the graduate catalog that your degree requires that internship to be done in the very first year of study for us to be able to authorize it before you have completed 2 full semesters of study as an F1 student. The ones that come to mind, I believe, is social work. Typically in their second semester has a required field placement, which means that we would need to be doing CPT authorization in the second semester of study. But outside of that, I don't believe I am aware of any program here at the University of Alabama that does require this explicitly in the catalog. The next thing is, besides the amount of time you've already been in a full-time F1 status, that you've met that 2-semester requirement, is that you have to have a job offer that is related to your major field of study. So CPT is not something where you can just come get CPT authorization and then start looking for your job. You actually have to get that job offer extended, and then you can apply. You have to have that job offer in hand. And then, of course, you need to work with your academic department for approval. So your department, because it's an academic program, because it's curricular, your department has to approve this. They have to complete a recommendation form for this, which is located on page 7 of the CPT packet. And you can find the CPT packet on the International Student and Scholar Services website. It can be found under the Forms section or in our employment section for F1 students. Now, CPT, because it's done during your degree program, a lot of students hold off and use CPT during the summer months, just between semesters or between academic years. But if you are going to be doing your CPT internship or work experience during the fall or spring semesters, when you are otherwise required to be enrolled, be aware that you have to maintain full-time status for the duration of that CPT. So if you're doing your CPT in the fall or spring semester, you've also got to be maintaining your full-time enrollment. You need to make continual normal progress towards your degree. And you can't begin your CPT experience until after an I-20 has been issued that has been authorized for CPT. So you can request it and submit it, but until International Student and Scholar Services has approved this, you cannot begin your CPT work experience. You have to have that I-20. That is the proof of your work eligibility. Now, I mentioned already that you have to have make normal progress towards your degree. An I-20 from our office, when we issue you an I-20 to begin a degree program, if you're in a bachelor's degree program, we typically issue that for a length of time of 5 years. So you begin as a freshman, and before you ever set foot on campus, we issue an I-20, and it's valid 5 years into the future, 10 semesters. And that is because even though a lot of students complete their bachelor's degree in 4 years, 12 credit hours is the minimum full-time enrollment requirement, and it will take 10 semesters of full-time 12 credit hour enrollment to meet the graduation requirements. So typically we issue an I-20 for 5 years. For master's degrees, it varies. It's all over the map. It's 1 year to up to 4 years for a master's degree on campus. And so we issue those for 3 years is our typical issuance because that seems to fit the majority of thesis track master's programs for the average length of time to completion. For PhD programs, we typically issue for 5.5 years. That all being said, when we issue this, it's our best guess. That's how long it's going to take you to complete your degree. If you finish your degree requirements early, well, we shorten your I-20, of course. If you change majors or you come into issues where you need extra time to complete your degree, of course, we can extend beyond that, that I-20 period that we've granted. But I need to stress that your I-20 duration should be sufficient for you to complete your academic degree. And participation in CPT is not an acceptable reason to delay your program completion. So if you've completed all of your degree requirements and you are looking to do an internship and you ask us to extend your I-20 so that you can do CPT, that is not something that we are able to do because just mere participation in CPT by itself is not a valid reason for an extension. Likewise, your participation in CPT, if that delays your graduation because you've taken basically a pause in your academic progress, well then that's not a valid reason for us to do an extension of your I-20. So in no way, shape, or form should your CPT experience be the reason for delays. If you have legitimate reasons for delays for completion of degree, like I said, change of major, change of research plans, that is, of course, a valid reason for needing to potentially extend your I-20. But just keep that in mind. We want you to focus on your primary purpose, which is to complete your degree. That is why you're on an F1 program, not for the work benefits that might come with your student visa status. Now, there are multiple types of CPT. There are really 3 primary types. There is CPT that is required for the degree. So curricular practical training, which is required for the program. That means that an internship or practical training experience or field work is required for every single student of that degree program in order to complete the degree. And this would be written into the catalog requirements in the graduate catalog or the undergraduate catalog. And there are very few degree programs at the University of Alabama that require some sort of field placement or practicum or other type of experience in order to complete the degree. The ones that come to mind are nursing. A lot of the programs in the College of Education that require field placement for teachers and or practicum experience for other educators. You have social work, which requires a certain number of hours in field placement. Psychology graduate programs often will require that, potentially counseling programs. So these are the ones that I could think of right offhand that do have degree requirements to do some sort of placement. And each of these are individualized within the catalog. Most of you will not qualify for this. Most of the time what we see is that the CPT experience is considered integral to the curriculum. So not required, but it is an integrated part of the academic curriculum and that is considered a major part of the academic experience. Not required, but highly beneficial to the academic experience. And so in most of these instances, what you're doing is you're going to work with your academic advisor to then get the approvals necessary to enroll into a course that would be related to this practical training experience. And then you would enroll in that class and get the authorization based on your academic advisor's recommendation that it is integral to your degree. There's often an internship credit that you can enroll in within your major or academic program, and that would tie in. If there isn't, you might look at courses that are like independent study or some sort of research related course that would tie into this, but you should be assigned course credit that would be tied to this. Again, it is curricular, so that is very important. And then finally, the third type that we see, and this is also quite common for master's students and PhD students, is dissertation or thesis research CPT. If off-campus work or training is necessary for you to complete your research for your dissertation or your thesis, then we can authorize it. And it can be tied to your dissertation hours, your 699 hours, or your thesis hours, your 599 research hours. Now, the thing is, you will have to have it tied to that, and it has to be very explicitly explained that the credit is related to this, your thesis or dissertation. It has to be explained how it's directly related to that. Now, often we have seen those that are in their dissertation or thesis phase of study, and they're working on that, and separately they get a training opportunity or an internship opportunity that they would like to do, and it's not exactly directly related to their dissertation or thesis. And in instances like that, where it's related to their degree but not tied directly to their thesis or dissertation research, we would ask that the department work with that student to do that as integral to the curriculum rather than dissertation or thesis research, because it really won't benefit in any way whatsoever the thesis or dissertation research that you're doing. So, and then we're going to move on to the next CPT. Now, I've talked a little bit about making progress towards your degree, but CPT can be authorized in either full-time or part-time work. Now, part-time is anything between 0 and 20 hours of work per week. And then full-time allows you to work over 20 hours per week. It doesn't mean necessarily 40 hours a week. It's anything above 20 hours per week. But these things have an overall impact on your eligibility for OPT. So if you do part-time CPT, there is no eligibility impact on your future eligibility for optional practical training. However, if you do full-time CPT, which is more than 20 hours of work per week, once you exceed 364 days of full-time CPT cumulative over your whole degree program, you will become ineligible for any OPT authorization at that degree level. This usually is not a big deal for most students because they typically don't do more than 1 or 2 semesters worth of CPT. But there are some programs where they may have field work that goes on for multiple semesters. And this is where we want to be very careful if their ultimate goal is also to preserve OPT, not to exceed that overall 365-day limit of full-time CPT engagement. So these are things that we talk about, and it may be something that you need to chat with us about as you do this, because if you're not going to do more than 1 semester of CPT, don't worry about it. But if you are looking at something that's going to have multiple semesters of practical training experience under CPT, that's something where we need to talk about that ultimate impact that it might have to your OPT eligibility. The other thing about full-time and part-time work authorization is if it's during the fall or spring semesters that you're seeking CPT, you're limited to 20 hours of work per week as an F1 student total. And that includes your assistantship or your on-campus work experience. So you need to be aware of that. If you're still working on your coursework and you haven't completed all your classwork, you are limited to a hard 20 hours per week. And that means that CPT authorization above the 20 hours per week is really not possible. Now, there are weird scenarios, not weird, but there are scenarios where you could potentially be doing more than 20 hours per week, and it could be okayed. The most common that we see is when graduate students, master's and PhD students, have completed all courses, and now they're only doing their thesis or dissertation research. During that time, once they're on thesis or dissertation research, we can authorize more than 20 hours of work per week. And so that could potentially be an option for you to do CPT full-time, even though you have not, you're still working towards your dissertation or thesis. There's also another scenario that this could come up. So I will keep moving on. Actually, let me go back for a second, because I don't know if it's going to come up in this. And maybe you remember, Trang. Does co-op come up in these slides? You're on mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I don't know if co-op comes up in these slides, but there is a scenario where co-op is an opportunity for a student to both enroll full-time through the co-op office and do full-time CPT in a semester. We do have some undergraduate students and even graduate students who are still pursuing their coursework go through the co-op office for that. That is a type of CPT authorization that can be done. It still rolls into this whole full-time, part-time dynamic for its impact on your OPT eligibility in the future, but it's something to be aware of. That is not necessarily an exception, it's just a different scenario. Okay, moving on. One thing you need to be aware of is the duration of CPT. So CPT, because it's tied to a course, because it's tied to your curriculum, it's authorized by the semester. And so if you want to do an internship in spring, we authorize it for the spring semester. You enroll in a class in the spring semester. The beginning and end dates are where it gets a little complicated, and we have a better chart to explain this on the next slide. But CPT can begin as early as the day after the prior semester, and it can go all the way up to the day before the next semester. So it can cover those gaps between semesters. It doesn't have to necessarily fall exactly on the semester start date and semester end date. It can cover the breaks in between. So CPT authorization also can be extended if recommended by your academic department and could go beyond one semester, but you have to enroll in courses each semester that would be tied to your CPT experience, and it has to be recommended, and we have to authorize it. We do it by the semester.
Alien, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a mono.
I'm going to mute that line. So CPT authorization is something that you need to be aware of, that it is by the semester. Now, this chart on the next slide helps to better explain this. When can you do CPT? So if you were doing it this spring semester, the CPT could have begun as early as the fall semester ended on December 13th, 2020. And then it could go all the way until the beginning of summer classes on May 1st, 2021. We actually switched to summer interim classes immediately after the spring semester ends. Summer CPT can begin as early as May 2nd, 2021, and it can go all the way up to the day before the fall semester begins, August 17th. Now, the summer classes you enroll in might not quite fit those dates, because obviously it's not exactly tied to those dates. But you can see where it marries up to the prior semester. It starts, it can start as early as the day after the prior semester ends. So this is kind of explaining better that overlap, covering those gaps between semesters. And then, of course, for those doing it in the fall semester, it could begin as early as August 1, which is after the summer sessions end, and it could go all the way until the start of spring 2022 classes to January 11th, and then spring 22 begins on January 12th. So that hopefully should better explain everything there. Now the CPT application process, I'm not going to go into that too much, but basically we do have a form. It's available on our website. You can scan these to Trang. Her email address is listed here on the slides. You would complete pages 5 and 6 of our CPT packet. The first 4 pages are kind of explain the authorization, the application process, and everything else. But the packet, the form itself begins on page 5. You would fill out pages 5 and 6, where we gather all your details about where you're going to work, when you're going to work, if it has any impact on any of your other work authorizations, and your agreement to abide by the CPT authorization rules. You would then work with your academic advisor to get approval for the CPT experience and to explain to us exactly what coursework you're going to be enrolled in. So if you're going through a traditional academic route where it's tied to your research hours or to a particular internship course, your academic advisor is going to be who completes this section of the packet. The co-op office would also fill this out if you're going to go through co-op instead of through your academic department. And then the co-op office is going to indicate to us where your internship will be authorized and what co-op credits you're going to be enrolled in for that semester. Again, you're going to bring those to us. You're going to submit by scan an official job offer letter. That's from the intern placement. Some companies honestly aren't big, and you might find an internship opportunity with a small what we would call a mom and pop business near campus, and they don't do job offers. And so if they don't, we still need a letter, but we realize they may not have, you know, specialized letterhead. We've got a template for them to like make an offer so that they can just fit it into some language that we can use to authorize this. So we do have that template on page 9 of our packet. We would need you to scan in your application to us copies of your I-20s that you've held since you've entered the US. This includes other institutions, because you may be transferring to us on a bachelor's degree, and if you've already done a year of CPT at another institution and then transferred to us to finish your bachelor's degree, it would be important to us to know any prior usage at the same degree level of your CPT authorization or OPT authorization, so that we know how to best advise you. We also need scans of your current passport page, current visa, even if it's expired, and your I-94 record, so that we can process this. And then that enrollment, just, you know, reminder, you do require to enroll. If you're doing this in this fall or the spring semesters, you still have to be enrolled full-time in order to maintain your F1 status. Generally speaking, that's 12 credit hours in the fall or spring for undergraduate students. For graduate students, it's typically 9 credit hours. It can be 6 credit hours of coursework if you're on an assistantship that is 0.5 FTE or 20 hours per week. There are exceptions, of course, for your final semester that you don't require to enroll 12 hours as an undergrad or 9 hours as a grad in your final semester. And so with those things, you would want to submit a less than full-time memo with us to explain that you're in your final semester and that, you know, you're still full-time even though you're not enrolled full-time. So anyway, that is a quick overview, and I'm about to turn it over to Trang so that she can cover OPT, which I think a lot of you guys are probably more interested in anyway. But many of you are probably thinking about the CPT authorization. And we are going to be answering lots of questions. So I know I've got the question screen right now, but Trang, do you feel like this is a good time to cover CPT related questions?
Sure. We have received a lot of pre-submitted questions. If you think of any questions that you may have after Charles' presentation, you can throw them all in the chat box, and we'll try to address them all if we could. But here are some of the questions that we received during the registration. So here is one that probably a lot of students will face at the time that they submit their job application. In job applications, under the "Are you legally allowed to work in the United States" column, do international students put yes or no?
That's a good question. So as you are applying for jobs, many of them will ask that question. And the answer is yes, to be honest. You are legally authorized or will be legally authorized to work upon beginning employment. Now, do you have that in your hand yet? Obviously, CPT requires a job offer for us to authorize. So no, you don't have your CPT authorization yet, but you will at the start of your first day of work. And so that's really what they should be asking is, will you be authorized to work on your first day of employment? That's probably a better question to ask as a potential employer to applicants, but they don't always word it like that. So if you see that question in your job search, do you have work authorization in the US? Just answer yes. And this will also apply to your OPT job search, because if you're applying for OPT, OPT is your work authorization. And of course you will have it, and you have to have it before you begin work. It's just the law. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Charter. That's really helpful, especially a lot of students say that, you know, if you choose no, probably screen out most of the job that you could apply for. So you are okay to check yes, because like Charter said, you will be able to apply for the work authorization, and you should have it by, you know, the start date of the job. So here's another one.
Okay.
That is related to CPT. Are students allowed to receive more than one CPT for internships at various times? For example, internship in summer 2021, and then internship in summer 2022.
Absolutely. You can do multiple internships and seek CPT authorization multiple times. It is even potentially possible to carry simultaneous CPT authorizations where you're working for two employers. Now, you know, of course, there are constraints about how many overall hours you can work, and just the physical limits of the 24-hour day. You can't you can't do everything. But yes, you can have multiple CPT authorizations over the course of your academic career for more than one employer. You know, just so long as it meets those other requirements and you're otherwise following the allowances for your CPT authorization.
Thank you. What options are there? Well, we touched it on CPT, but we also want to talk about OPT later on. But the question is that do these options for work authorization depend on nationality?
Good question. Not necessarily. However, not for the CPT authorization. I need to put this out there. There are times where you may be applying for a training experience or work experience, and there may be, because of grants associated with the project, restrictions on it being limited to U.S. citizens or U.S. permanent residents. And so it's not even a matter of being on OPT or CPT. You wouldn't even be eligible to work for that project even if you were on an H-1B, just because of those types of restrictions. But those are very rare. And typically in the job description, they will put that requirement there. Must be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. And so that's not something that you need to worry overly much about. If it has that in there, there's probably some government restriction. For instance, to work in my office and be a designated school official who can sign and issue I-20s, you must be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. That's a requirement of Homeland Security to be able to get that authorization. So when we do a job search for an international student advisor, that is one of our limits. We have to limit it to U.S. citizens and permanent residents, because they will never be able to issue an I-20 if they don't hold citizenship or permanent residence.
If I submitted papers for adjustment of status in December, this is a good question. It crossed a little bit over between CPT or OPT, but basically if the student has applied for adjustments of status in December, should he or she still apply for CPT or OPT given that he is graduating this semester?
So many of you may have opportunities to apply for a green card through, so adjustment of status is a process in the green card process where it's actually, you have qualified to be sponsored for permanent residence, and you've submitted your actual application for the green card, and you're adjusting to permanent resident status. The thing about that is, you are adjusting from your current visa status. And as an F1 student, your current visa status is F1. We always tell all of our students and scholars to maintain their underlying status until they get approval. And the reason for that is there are times where green card applications are denied. If the attached petition that qualified you to apply for that green card is denied, everything gets denied. And so it is just the safest possible option to maintain your F1 status for as long as possible and to seek work authorization through your F1 status, even if you might have separate work authorization eligibility under your pending green card. And the reason for that is if you've maintained your F1 status and your green card is ultimately denied, guess what? You're fine. You still have an F1. You still have work eligibility and perfect legal status. If you abandon your F1 status in order to work based on your pending green card, and you just completely abandon your F1, if your green card ultimately gets denied, then you have nothing. And that is a tough situation to be in. I don't know of any reputable advisor or attorney who wouldn't tell you maintain your underlying visa status for as long as possible. Now, there are situations where it just becomes impossible to maintain that underlying status. There's no way to do it. And then you're really just reliant on your pending green card case and hopeful, and usually it works out that it gets approved. But it is something that you should be aware of. So if you've got a pending adjustment of status, but you have an F1 and you haven't otherwise abandoned your F1 status or violated your F1 status, maintain it. Go ahead and apply for CPT or OPT, because there is nothing that will hurt you in doing that.
Thank you, Charter. Yeah, that's very clear. It's still better to have the safety net instead of relying on an application that you don't know the result yet. Whereas if you maintain your F1, you are still eligible for all of the benefits for F1 students.
Absolutely.
Right. This one is a little specific, and I don't know if it's going to be us that could help, but somebody asks how could she or he get a training opportunity in the field of criminology?
So that's one where I would say it's not really our office that would be able to help with that. I would definitely talk to the Career Center. So we have an amazing Career Center here on campus, and they have advisors that are focused on either certain colleges or certain majors. And so there should be somebody there who works closely with criminology, and to also talk to the faculty in the criminology department, because they often are recommending placement of interns at certain facilities, whether it be working in like a judge's office or working with a local police station. And I'm sure that there are many, many opportunities for internships. It's just a matter of being able to locate them and know how to apply. But yeah, talk to your faculty, talk to your academic advisor, talk to the Career Center, the person who does the advising there.
I hate to jump in, but I just happen to know a lot of professors and faculty in criminology just by random meetings, and a good half of that faculty are adjunct faculty, meaning they work full-time, like in the police department or as a judge. And so they're teaching part-time here, but then they're going off to their day jobs, working in the field of criminology. So there's plenty of opportunities. I mean, they're constantly looking out for student interns.
Mm-hmm. I have no doubt you'll find placement.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Charter. The next question is, it's crossing over between H-1B, J-1, and OPT, but I think I'm gonna just go to
hit it, and I'll do what I can, and then I think probably I'll jump in.
So if I am going to be a postdoc after graduate and they offer me H-1B or J-1, should I use my OPT or use H-1B or J-1? How long does it take to receive the work authorization nowadays after it has been applied?
Okay, so quick answer there is go for your OPT first. And we're going to talk about the timing of it. In fact, Trang's going to go into the OPT section here shortly, but generally speaking, you can apply about 3 months, 90 days before your the end of your final semester. So your completion date, if you're in a PhD program, that means the semester in which you're submitting your dissertation, that's when you're completing your degree. That semester you need to apply for OPT. Do it as early as you can in that semester, up to 90 days. So if you are submitting your dissertation this semester, May 1 is your final date. And so right now you can apply for OPT. Start that route. It does take between 3 and 5 months currently. I believe it is crept over 3 months and has pushed into the 5-month territory. But we're hopeful that those dates will start to improve with these next several months. A lot of that is COVID related, just because staffing has been extremely difficult at the USCIS processing centers. So start with OPT. Now, timing may be an issue, and that's something that Chris often has to deal with, where somebody's graduating, but they don't have 5 months. They're applying for OPT way too late. And so in that case, H-1B makes the most sense. Transitioning from an F1 to an H-1B within the US is pretty easy, but most people will begin on OPT and then transition to H-1B, either in their first year, or if they're STEM eligible, within the 24-month extension period. Some people go straight from F1 to H-1B, like they're studying and then the next minute they're on an H-1B. Transitioning to a J-1, we use J-1s a lot for postdocs, but changing status in the US to a J-1 from an F1 is not so easy. It uses a different type of application, and the change of status applications, the I-539s, on average take 10 months. So we don't do J-1 change of status in the US. We typically use J-1s only if a postdoc is outside of the US. Now, there are universities I know of that say we only ever use J-1s for postdoc positions. We will not sponsor postdocs for an H-1B. And if that's the case, OPT is probably going to be your best bet, at least for beginning that. And if you're STEM eligible, you could probably get through your entire postdoc career just on your OPT. So really it kind of depends on that. But I think it really would be good for you if you have a solid opportunity and an offer to begin talking with your employer, the university where you're going to work, and talking to their international office, because sometimes you're talking to the professor who's going to hire you or the department chair. And I'm going to tell you, there is not a single professor on this campus or department chair that understands immigration any better than the 3 people that are talking to you right now. They come to us to ask these questions. And sometimes I've had professors who themselves used to be on a J1 or an H1B and now have a green card or even US citizenship, and they remember the rules back when they did it years and years ago. And so they may start advising and just be completely giving bad advice. So talk to the international office or whoever handles faculty and postdoc hires if you're at that stage where they're getting close to making an offer. Because really that visa sponsorship that we choose, I mean, Chris, you can point that out. It's a matter of like, it's really individualized, right?
Yeah, it's very, very individualized. Just because it depends on the student-specific immigration history. That's one. It depends on the timeline. And you know, sometimes we can do the what I like to say the shotgun approach is just shoot and apply for OPT and H1B, or but sometimes we can't. But it's very, very specific to the student, also to the timeline, and to the, with H1Bs, I don't want to get too much into it, but there are also certain salary requirements as well too. And so if the salary doesn't make the salary that's needed for an H1B, and the department isn't willing to match that, then we might have to go to another route. So unfortunately, I mean, there are some generalizations that we can we can say that, you know, generally apply for both, but in some cases it may not be possible depending on the specific case.
All right, Trang, do we have any other questions? Oh, you're on mute still.
Well, thank you both, Charter and Chris. Well, I think that's pretty much it, at least for somewhat related to CPT. We have other questions that we would like to address, you know, after the OPT section. And I saw some of the questions in the chat that probably will be answered during the presentation for the OPT as well. Okay. For example, the completion date, you know, like can they work as a contractor, 1099 contractor? Those questions will be addressed during the presentation.
So I am going to put myself on mute so that you can begin the OPT part of the seminar, and we'll go through those slides, and then we'll handle tons and tons of OPT related questions. And just as a reminder to everybody, we are recording this. I'm going to get this edited a bit and uploaded to a YouTube channel that we can share back out the link to the video for anybody who wanted to go back through any part of this. I think we missed a few minutes at the beginning of this, so I'm going to see if I can't recreate that and kind of stitch it together. But in any case, we're gonna get going. But Trang, as you need me to advance, just tell me to advance the slide.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about optional practical training, the overview of it, and how to apply, the timeline, and you know, what type of employment that you can accept under OPT. You can just move to the next slide. And all right, optional practical training. It's there's a long definition of it, but basically it's a 12-month temporary work authorization for students who are in F1 status. So the training is temporary. That means that you have that 12 months, but you can't really work on OPT forever and ever. But it is a path to lead to H-1B visa. The training is optional, meaning that it doesn't have to be part of your curriculum, not like CPT, where you have to earn some academic credit hours that are attached to it, but it still have to be related to your major. Or you can use LPT or you don't. It's completely optional. Some students choose to, you know, move on to their graduate program without doing OPT. Some people want to have like 1 year of experience before they on to their graduate level or, you know, to H-1B, that's completely up to you. So that's why there's optional in his name. And for the work, it can be paid or unpaid. So again, the emphasis here is on training. Just like CPT, it does not matter whether you are paid or not. You need the work authorization in order to work. Next slide, please. So here are the types of work that allowed on OPT. Pretty much anything that is related to your major. You can be a regular full-time or part-time employee that receive a W-2. You can be paid by multiple short-term employers. You can do work for hire, and like somebody mentioned, it's like the 1099 employment based. That's fine. You could be a self-employed business owner. In fact, I have a couple of students who opened their own business while on OPT. One of them was in business major, and he opened a company that exports wine from the US. So you probably will need like a longer plan to after the business take off, but well, that's what he did when he was on OPT. You can be employed through an agency. So basically that the agency is like the hiring agency. They place you in jobs. They're like the bridge between the job seeker and the employer. So that's totally fine if you're on OPT. Or you could volunteer your work or doing some unpaid internships as well. And like I say, as long as what you do is directly related to your major, it's totally acceptable. All right, next slide, please. All right, again, the stress here is that the job must be related to your major. If you're not, well, I hope that everybody know what their major is, but you're not sure what your major is, you can find it on your I-20. On the old format is the item 5, and on the new I-20 format is listed under the program of study. We cannot authorize OPT based off on your minor or your previous degree. Job offer is not necessary for OPT. There is the key difference between OPT and CPT. For CPT, you must have a job offer in your hand before you can seek out the work authorization under CPT, but for OPT, it is not a requirement. So that is very important as because it takes long time for OPT to be approved. So if you don't need the job offer to apply for it, you can apply very early and have that application, you know, be reviewed and processed by USCIS. And by the time you graduate, maybe you'll have that approved and you're ready to go to work. The OPT is recommended by International Student and Scholar Services, but it ultimately has to be authorized by USCIS, meaning that we can determine whether you're eligible for OPT or not. We can make the recommendation in CVIS, but ultimately, you have to mail out your packet to USCIS and wait for USCIS to make the final decision on that. And that's why it takes a lot longer for OPT in compared with CPT. Here are the eligibility requirements for OPT. Well, first, you have to be in lawful F1 status. You have to have complete at least one full academic year in status. This is very similar with CPT. You have to intend to get a job that directly related to your major, to your program of study. And you have not completed more than 364 days of full-time CPT at this degree level, as Charter stressed earlier, that, you know, if your full-time CPT getting close to that 1 year mark, we'll really have to be careful, and you need to plan this out so that you don't go over that threshold if your internship or your work, put your full-time CPT close to that threshold. And you have not been authorized for an equivalent of 12 months of OPT work authorization for the same degree level or higher. So at each educational level, you got 12 months. Let's say 12 months at bachelor degree level, you got 12 months at master degree level, and 12 months at the doctoral degree level. So let's say somebody who got 12 months of OPT based on completing his first bachelor degree level, getting a second bachelor doesn't give him another 12 months of OPT because you already have that 12 months based on that degree level. All right, let's move on to the next slide. When OPT can occur. So that is about the timeline of OPT. There are two types of OPT. The pre-completion OPT is used before you have completed your program, and the post-completion OPT is for students who want to start working after they have completed their program or coursework. So for pre-completion OPT, you can use it during your annual vacation, like summer break, or while school is in session, but you can only work part-time, meaning that it's limited to 20 hours per week. You can also do pre-completion OPT after you have completed all of the coursework and only have thesis or dissertation remaining. For post-completion OPT, once your degree is completed, you can do full-time OPT. And this is the type that is more common among F1 students. Okay, next slide, please. Duration of OPT. So you're eligible for 12 months of OPT. As I mentioned earlier, there's pre-completion and post-completion OPT. So the combination of pre-completion OPT and the post-completion OPT may not exceed 12 months. So say somebody used pre-completion OPT for 3 months before they graduate, they will only have 9 months of post-completion OPT to be used after they have graduated. And the pre-completion OPT and post-completion OPT are two separate applications, so you have to file 2 times with 2 different applications and paying the filing fee separately. You must complete the initial post-completion OPT no later than 14 months after the program end date, regardless of the OPT employment start date. What it means is that, once you complete your program, if you are in status, F1 students will have a 2-month or 60-day grace period following that program completion date. So that 2 months plus the 12 months of OPT, that is 14 months. So the end date of your OPT will never go beyond 14 months from the completion date of your program. Now, students who are in STEM eligible field may be eligible for an additional 24 months following the end date of their OPT. And when I touch on STEM later on towards the end of the OPT section.
And Trang, while we're on the slide, I wanted to stress and just ask your opinion. The pre-completion OPT, even though it is an option for students, it really is very rare where it would make sense to do a pre-completion OPT. In fact, we won't outright deny it, but we discourage it in most cases just because it adds complications. Trang, in your experience with pre-completion OPT, has it ever worked out really well?
Well, we usually just encourage students to use CPT if at all possible instead of pre-completion OPT. For one, like I say, anytime you use for pre-completion OPT will be subtracted from the whole total 12 months of OPT. Also, it have a high chance of leading to complication, just like Charter said, because well, we have a couple of cases where students applying for pre-completion OPT for 3 months, and USCIS approved it for 12 months of pre-completion OPT. Now that is USCIS fault, but in the end, it's still the student who got hurt. And you know, like if they already approved for 12 months of pre-completion OPT, that means she had 0 time left on her post-completion OPT to be used after she graduated. So it's a scenario that we didn't want. And also the timeline of pre-completion OPT. Let's say if you're planning to work in a month for your summer internship, and applying for pre-completion OPT takes 3 to 5 months, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to wait on that application, paying the application fee, and not having that work authorization in time to start your internship.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons why pre-completion OPT it doesn't make sense. Our other headache is I've seen a lot of people who want, like, they're trying to time it around their graduation, and they want to start working on pre-completion OPT and then also simultaneously file for post-completion OPT to begin after their graduation date. And they're hoping that those 2 applications will be approved so that there's a seamless transition. And it's almost always never seamless. There's almost always a gap in employment. And the worst thing in the world is to begin employment and then tell your employer, yeah, I got to stop working now because I'm not legally authorized to work for a while. So then you have to basically be fired, and you may outright lose your job opportunity. So anyway, anyone who's reading that and like, oh, that's an option for me, please consider that that's probably not going to be a good option. Focus on CPT and then the traditional post-completion or post-graduation OPT options.
So when to apply for OPT? Well, again, we'll discourage students to apply for pre-completion OPT for various reasons, as we mentioned before. But if you're going to apply for it, you can apply up to 90 days before your work starting date. If you have enrolled more than 1 full-time academic semester. If it is your first year, you can apply as early as 90 days before completing your first academic year in status. For post-completion OPT, so you have to determine your program completion date, and you can file for OPT up to 90 days prior to that program completion date. And the program completion date could be a very confusing thing for a lot of students, and I'm going to go into details of explaining the program completion date, especially for thesis track, the master's students who are on thesis track and PhD students as well. So here are the timeline for post-completion OPT. If you see the first vertical bar block, let's say completion date. So, and the second one is the end of your grace period. So from your completion date, you have a grace period of 60 days. Now you can apply for OPT up to 90 days before the completion date, and up to 60 days after that completion date. So you have a 5-month window of applying for OPT. For post-completion OPT, the start date of your OPT must be between the 2 dates, the completion date and the end date of your grace period. So that's basically the key. You can't really start post-completion OPT before your completion date, or more than 60 days from that completion date. All right, please to the next slide. All right, here is the chart for completion date for master's program. I won't go into details and, you know, like read you all of the dates here, but the confusion usually comes when students who are on thesis track and they submit the thesis to ProQuest early enough to meet the deadline to enroll in 0 credit hours in the following semester. And that's when the program completion date got really mixed up with, you know, the graduation date. So in the eyes of, you know, in the perspective of immigration regulations, when you have completed all of the program requirements, that's when you have completed your program. It does not matter whether you're going to attend the graduation ceremony in that semester or not. If you have completed your program requirements, you have completed the program. So to give an example, let's say if a student, a master's student, I'm looking at the summer 2021 block. So if a student submitted his dissertation before 4:45 p.m. May 28, 2021, that is the deadline to enroll, to meet the deadline to enroll in 0 credit hour in summer 2021. All right, well, that's awesome. You will attend summer graduation. You will walk, or you got the diploma as all of other folks who graduate in the end of summer 2021. However, the end date of your I-20 will be May 1st, which is the end of spring 2021, not the end of summer 2021. The end date reflected, you know, in CVITs will be May 1st, 2021. Yeah, a lot of times students confuse between the actual date printed on their I-20, the date that they attend the graduation ceremony, and the actual date of their program completion date. So these has to be clear so that there's, you can plan around that correct completion date so that you can apply for OPT or transition to a new program, whatever it is, but you have to determine the correct completion date. Your I-20 may end 3 years from now, but if you completed all of the program this semester, that's when your I-20 ends.
So, Trang, I hate to interrupt you, but a question came up in the chat, which I think matches perfectly to what you're talking about right now. And that is the completion day the day I pass my final defense, or the day I turn in my finished thesis dissertation, which is usually sometime after the final defense?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, and I'm sure that a lot of students will have that question in their mind. Okay, so for thesis master students or PhD students, the completion date could be as early as the date that you submit your final dissertation to ProQuest, and as late as the commencement of the semester in which you submit that final dissertation. It's kind of confusing explaining in words, but let me give you an example. All right, so if you submit your final dissertation, say March 1st, 2021, right? That when you submit your, you finish your dissertation in February, you revise all of the dissertation, you submit the final pretty one on ProQuest on March 1st, 2021. So that's spring 2021, right? The commencement date of spring 2021 is May 1st, 2021. So the completion date in this particular example could be as early as March 1st, 2021, up until May 1st, 2021. Now, the reason why there's some flexibility for thesis master students and PhD students is that some of students, even though you have completed your dissertation, but you probably still hold a GA or a TA that require you to complete that duties for the rest of the semester. Well, you may finish with your dissertation, but you still have to teach a class, you still have to grade, you know, some papers and stuff. And your actual program requirement is not really completed until the end of that semester when you submit all of the work that you are due. Does that make it better and less confusing, I hope?
Yeah, and just to tack onto that, the reason to choose the earlier date as your completion date, which does come up for those that want to use the submission date of their thesis or their dissertation into the graduate school in progress as the end date of their overall program, is because maybe they've got a job offer ready to go and they want to start work immediately and they don't want to wait until May 1st. They've submitted everything, they're done, their ties to the university are complete on March 1st after they hit that upload. And you know, they'll come back for their graduation ceremony for the gown and the cap and the whole bit, but they have a job offer waiting and they need to be able to apply for their OPT as early as possible. And in those instances, yeah, we'll end the I-20 based off of that submission completion in ProQuest, so that they can apply that much earlier for their OPT. Most students, I would say, Trang, and you have a lot more experience, but most students keep their end date tied to the end date of that semester in which they're submitting their dissertation or thesis. They don't choose something in the middle of the semester.
Right. You know, like a lot of times because of this flexibility, you know, like students can use that completion date to their advantage. Like Charter said, if students have a job offer and they don't want to wait until the end of that semester, you can choose the date that you completed you submit your dissertation as a completion date. But some students who, you know, want to buy some time in the job search, you know, like they're not sure whether they're gonna land a job yet, and you know, like having that extra time, you know, from the time that you have submitted the dissertation until the end of that semester, it's like, well, a month or two that you can use to applying for jobs and seeking out opportunities.
And let's move on to the PhD dates, because those, if the master's dates were confusing any of you on master's programs, the PhD dates are a little bit more confusing just because of how the graduate school has their enrollment requirements set for their final semester.
Right. So here are the dates for the doctoral students. So again, I'm gonna just delve into one specific example just to make it a little bit easier to understand. So say if you're submitted your dissertation, I'm looking at the summer 2021 block, and if you submitted your dissertation before 4:45 p.m. on May 4th, 2021, you meet the deadline to enroll in 0 credit hours in summer 2021. But your program completion date is considered to be May 1st, which is the end date of spring semester, not summer semester. So again, you may walk, you might have your cap and gown and your diploma in August of 2021. But in CVIS, from immigration perspective, you've completed everything on May 1st. Now, if you submit your dissertation after 4:45 on May 4th, 2021, but before 4:45 on May 28th, 2021, that's the deadline to enroll in 1 credit hour for summer 2021. Now you have some components, you're still working in that summer semester. So your completion date could be as late as July 31st, 2021, which is the commencement date for summer. And again, if you submit your final dissertation on progress after 445 on May 28th, 2021, you have to enroll in at least 3 credit hours, $6.99 in summer 2021. But again, your program completion date could be as late as July 31st, 2021. And if you have any confusion about those dates, ask us, talk to us, and we'll figure it out for you if it's not that clear.
Generally speaking, and I think that this is, I mean, the time and the specifics are often the more difficult thing, but keeping in mind that if you're ever in 0 credit hours, you are not maintaining your visa status. So if as a graduate student, your timing of your submission of your thesis or dissertation leads you to not be able to participate in that semester's graduation ceremonies, the graduate school is not going to force you to enroll in any credit hours the next semester. And so your requirement is 0 credit hours. If that is the case, then you are not maintaining visa status. You have completed all degree requirements in the prior semester, even if you might participate in the graduation ceremonies in the following semester. It's really just a matter of, with those timing considerations about that enrollment requirement, about your status, your ability to walk across the stage and get your hood and your cap and gown and the whole bit. So that's the general requirement. If ever you are allowed that 0 credit hour exception, you need to be very aware that you have already passed your final semester that you can be in a valid status. So keeping those 2 very distinct things in mind. Date of your completion could very well be in a different semester from your date of walking in the ceremonies.
Sean?
Sorry, we'll take questions later, if that's okay. I am going to move along so that we can get this section done.
All right, we have a little nice drawing right there, but this is just like the general overview of the OPT application process. It starts with you gathering the documents and submit it to us. So one of the ISS advisor will process your application and issue you a new I-20. This new I-20 will be required for your complete OPT application. So once you receive this I-20, you will then mail your OPT packet to USCIS. Once USCIS receive your application, they will start adjudicating, and if everything goes smoothly, after 3 to 5 months, your OPT is approved and you receive an EAD card, and you can start working if you have the card in your hand and the start date on the card is current. I just have a little like chart right here just so you know like where your role fit in the whole process. Many students mistakenly thinking that once they submit the documents to us that is the end of their OPT application process, which is not the case. It doesn't end there. We helped you with putting together application. We're making sure that you are eligible for OPT and issue you with the I-20. We'll help you with that part. But then you need to mail your OPT packet to USCIS. And then once it is in USCIS hand, well, it's a black box, to be honest. We have no control over how long it will take and what they're doing with the application. So just so you can visualize the whole process and who does what in this whole thing. All right, so and it takes 3 to 5 months. So planning ahead is very important. Because like I say, it's in the hand of USCIS. We can't really do anything to speed it up or make it happen faster. And if there's like something unexpectedly hit, like for example, COVID, it takes over 3 months for a receipt notice to be issued. It's too bad, but it's nothing that we could change. So you can only control your part of when you're applying and make it as early as possible.
And just to add a couple of things here is, one huge caveat is, this is the situation right now. You are going to have to be aware that this could change, and sometimes it changes very dramatically and very quickly. Sometimes it gets worse. Sometimes it takes longer. I remember a time years and years ago where OPT was exceeding 6 months processing time. And that has been a long time ago, but the fact that we have some cases getting up to 5 months, it is very unfortunate, because it is unfair because of the restrictions on how early you can apply, because you can only apply 90 days before your completion date or graduation date. It automatically builds in a situation where you're not going to have work authorization necessarily directly after your completion. But this could change very quickly. There are current lawsuits in the works because of slow adjudication of these cases, and there are recommendations by several dozen organizations to petition USCIS to reinstate some old rules that they had several years ago, which guaranteed processing in 90 days or less. And that might come back. That might come back. So we, of course, will always provide you the most up-to-date information. So whenever you're ready to apply for OPT, you might be in your first year of study right now, and it might be 3 years from now before you apply. This whole scenario and this chart might completely change by then. So just take this as a snapshot in time. This is true on February 25th, 2021. It may not be true on February 25th, 2022. So anyway, keep that in mind.
All right, I would like to move to the next slide. All right, so there's a complete packet for OPT application that you can find on our website, and I provide the link in the slide here. To start the process, basically you're going to complete all of these documents and follow the instructions in the forms, and you scan them to me. Currently, the processing time is 3 to 5 business days. There are some key things that you need to remember while you are on OPT. The one thing that I stress over and over to all OPT students is that you may not accrue more than 90 days of unemployment while you're on OPT for the whole period of the 12 months. So if you apply for OPT, the OPT is approved, you got the E80 card, and on that E80 card, there's a start date printed on it. From that start date, you may not accrue more than 90 days of unemployment counting from that start date. So if USCIS take long to process your application, it doesn't impact you as far as that 90 days of unemployment rule. But if you're working somewhere and if you don't work, well, making sure that you keep that 90 days of unemployment. If you work and you don't report to us, well, it's still treated as if you're not working because you don't report. If you don't report, we don't know that you are working somewhere, and those clocks are automatically calculated, and your service record will be terminated automatically at the end when that 90 days is up. So there's a mandatory reporting requirement. Anytime you find a job, you end a job, you have a change in address, you have a change in immigration status, you need to make sure to let us know. You report it to ISSS so we can make update in your record. Every 6 months, even if there's no change, you're supposed to check in with us. Even just a quick email saying, hey, that is my 6-month report, there's no change. And we need that in your file. Anything happens, we have that documented, that yes, you're maintaining your F1 status, you report everything, and you also check in with us every 6 months. OPT is terminated if your CVIS record is transferred to another institution to begin a new program of study. So let me give you an example. There was one student who used her OPT to work while she's waiting for a decision to go to graduate school. Now, once she got the admission letter, she requests her I-20 to be updated, not knowing that, well, OPT will be canceled out if that I-20 is prepared. And so that is one thing to remember. Well, we try our best to remind you again at the time when you request your transfer, but it's always good to know about the rule that you don't accidentally cancel out your OPT if you're actually using it for work. Sometimes if you got a really great internship and you have a best time of your life working professionally, and if you find out that your work authorization is not valid, it's just not going to be a fun situation to find yourself in. So if you're going to transfer out, or if you're going to request an I-20 for a new degree, and if you are on OPT, keep all of these rules in mind and also consult with us if you have any doubts or concerns. Another thing is that your travel signature is valid for 6 months only when you are on OPT. So on your on the second page of your I-20, if you look, you probably already have a travel signature on it. When you are an actively enrolled student, that travel signature is valid for 12 months. But if you're on OPT, it's valid for 6 months only. All right, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about the STEM OPT extension. So if you are students in STEM field, STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. You may be eligible for an extension of 24 months of work authorization. We have linked to the detailed list of what majors are considered to be in STEM field that you can take a look, or you can do a quick Google search, you know, STEM eligible zip code. The zip code that is listed right next to your major is the zip code of your program. And if that zip code fits or in the STEM eligible list, you may be eligible for STEM OPT extension. So the requirement, obviously, you have to complete a STEM degree. That is very important. We won't recommend STEM for students who have not completed their program. So while you don't have to complete your program to apply for OPT, but you have to have completed a STEM a program in order to be eligible for STEM extension. You must be currently engaged in post-completion OPT. That is important as well. If you are on pre-completion OPT, for example, we can't do STEM OPT extension. You and your employer must complete an I-983 training plan. Basically, it's like a plan for you where you and your employer set up goals and the measure trainings and how you measure, you know, like the improvement or the skills that you gain in 2 years of training. You must maintain your valid F1 status during post-completion OPT. That means you don't do anything to violate that status. You're doing all of the reporting that are mandatory, stuff like that. The 24-month extension is possible twice per lifetime, meaning that you use it on your bachelor and your master's already. You can't do it on your PhD level if you do it on your master and well, if you don't use it during your after your bachelor degree level, then you still have 2 times left to be used for your master and PhD level. So twice per lifetime, not like OPT. For OPT, you're eligible for 12 months of OPT for each educational level, but STEM OPT is only two per lifetime. STEM OPT application, you can file with USCIS up to 90 days before your OPT expired, but you can submit the application to us to be processing up to 120 days before your OPT expiration date. All right, well, there are several requirements for the employer and the job to be eligible for, you know, STEM OPT extension. But the one thing that make it different from regular OPT, standard 12 months OPT, is that the job must be 20 hours or more, and it must be paid. Unlike OPT, you can, you know, do volunteer work or unpaid internship, but for STEM OPT, the job that you do must be paid, and it must be full-time. And to be considered full-time is 20 hours or more. The employer must be registered and in good standing with USCIS E-Verify. Basically, they have to be an E-Verify employer, and they agree to like E-Verify all of the hires, whether they're international or you know, US citizens. So the E-Verify, each employer who participate in this E-Verify will have an E-Verify number, and you must provide this E-Verify number on the I-765. Like when you're applying for STEM OPT extension, you must provide that E-Verify number. And again, they have to, employers have to verify all newly hired employees, and they must complete an I-983 training plan with the students. If you want to take a look at like what the training plan looks like, we have the link right there for you. And they must agree to report termination or departure of OPT employer to UA International Student and Scholar Services. So that means, well, by signing the I-983, that means they must agree to do this. If you ever depart the job or end the job, they must let us know. That's one of the requirements that they must sign in order to make them a qualifying employer. All right. Any questions?
So Chris, can you share with us any of the questions that you've got coming up through the chat? And I'm going to see if I can't pull up those pre-submitted questions.
We just had two really good ones. First one's kind of a downer, but it was asked, and so we'll start off with that one first and do the positive question after that. First one is, can my OPT be denied?
That's a good question. I would say it happens, but rarely. I really never had an outright denial in my career of processing OPT. The few cases that the application was denied because either the students have already moved on to a new program, so basically their CVS record is no longer with us, or because they already have like a H-1B or some type of work visa approved. So it's kind of like a good kind of denial because they have another visa that they can use to work, or they move on to a different program. There was one case that will receive a denial, but it was an arrow on the end of USCIS, and it was unfortunate because they look up the student by a previous CVS record, which was terminated in the past. And they base off on that and make the decision. Well, we challenged it and it was eventually approved, but it's still like a little pain to deal with. But in general, like I say, it's very rare that it is denied unless, you know, there's something that you hide from us and we don't know, like Chris, maybe you can share with us, there was like denial because of a DUI.
Yeah, so the only times I've seen outright denials when it was really on the student is when they had fallen out of status in the past and we did not catch it, and usually we are really good about catching things. That's never happened here, but in a lot of cases, when a student has transferred to us, we don't know their past immigration status because we cannot see their record until they come to us. And unless the student knew about it and was not very forthcoming, or they just didn't know about it, that's when it can come back to hurt them. But that's really the only case that I've seen when there are outright denials is when they were falling out of status and their I-20 was not terminated at the time. They didn't re-enter on a new I-20. I have had many examples though where it has been, quite frankly, USCIS's fault. That's 99% of the cases where it's something with USS. The classic one was, so as you know, Trang does, you know, all the OPT, and unless she gets incredibly swamped or she's out, I will do an occasional OPT. And of course, the one time where I did an OPT, it gets denied. And the reason why it was denied is they thought that her signature was actually a digital signature that you use like on Adobe, if you know what I mean. And luckily we got the denial maybe a week before her grace period. And so we filed again the day before, or no, we filed, I recommended it again, and then she filed, she overnighted it, and it reached USCIS on the last day and it was approved. So, you know, the short answer is
really important point that Chris just pointed it out is you never digitally signed your I-765 if you apply for OPT. You need to hand sign it with a real pen. Okay?
Yeah.
They'll take a scan of that signature, but they want to see that somebody physically put a signature on it.
And the thing, what got confused is she signed it in black, but it was a scan. And because this signature, and which is always why you should do it in blue.
Yeah,
so yeah, that was something that maybe I should have caught, honestly. But the fact of the matter is, it was not a digital signature. It was a real signature. It was just scanned, and USCIS didn't believe it. But yeah.
But so I think I would say what we do 150 to 200 of these a year, and 149 to 199 you have no issues. If there are any issues, it's honestly errors at USCIS, and it's usually something that we can overcome. And so we don't consider those errors or those mistakes to be denials necessarily. We consider those to be just errors, and that we fix those.
We'll probably have ones of those in every few years.
Yeah.
Next question. We got two more actually. This is a little bit more broad, but I think it is good to talk about. Do we expect any changes in immigration under the current administration? This person specifically said to like H-1B wages. I can talk about that a little bit, but generally any positive news?
Yeah. So just yesterday, the executive order that was put in place last summer that put green card processing done at consulate locations, H-1B visa issuance, L visa issuance overseas on hold because of concerns about the economy and the workforce that had actually been extended to March 31st. That was rescinded. So that I need to go back and make sure I'm saying everything properly, but that came out last night. So that's been rescinded. The Muslim travel ban was rescinded. A lot of the restrictions that we've seen placed in the last year have been rescinded. There is indications that some other major changes for basic stuff is going to be walked back, and that there are positive indications that there will be some stabilization. And then there's a really great immigration law being proposed. I don't have a lot of hope that that's going to get through to the president's office for signature, but there is hope on the immigration front that that things will normalize and stabilize somewhat and be a little bit more friendly both to international students and international employees and immigrants in general. We have some faith that there is a lot of interest on both sides of the political aisle to get these things done. Some of them are a little bit more unlikely, but most of the basic stuff have broad support among employers. And I think that that's the most important part, is that when your industry, when your factories, when your tech giants, when your big employers are saying, hey, this is crazy, we can't hire good people, get rid of this, it gets some attention. So so those are out there. Chris, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, and actually, Charlie, this might be a little bit news to you, because I was in a session actually this Wednesday about with a law firm about the possible current changes and with H-1B wages. And so, real quick synopsis: last year they came out with a ridiculous rule that changed the wages, where wages in pretty much any discipline at every wage level doubled to, or like were raised from anywhere from a third to doubled and sometimes tripled the salaries. That was shot down, and then they proposed a different rule which still jacked up the wages. And so they are expecting that there will be an increase in wages, but the administration is going to look over it and is currently going to probably make some changes, but not at the rates that they are now, and even the proposed rule that's supposed to happen in July. And they're also talking about increasing these wages, but doing it gradually over the next 3 years. So wages change every year, July 1st. And so this July 1st, there would be a small increase. The second year, there would be a small increase upon that. And then the third year would be increased wage as well. So they're expecting an increase in wages, but not significantly to where it would be hurting employers. We do have, let's see, another good question is, does having a source of passive income, which I assume means like interest from stocks, bonds, bank accounts, does that have an effect on OPT duration or eligibility?
Well, that's a very good question. In general, passive income, truly passive income, like coming from an interest of a bank account, or you know, any sort of passive income is considered to be okay for F1 students, as long as you're not like actively have to put in labor and exert service in order to obtain that type of passive income. It should not impact your OPT.
Okay, and one, Trang, because this happens a lot. I wouldn't say a lot, but it does happen. So it's good to ask is it possible to change the proposed OPT start date, okay, if I do not finish my degree on time?
That's a very, very good question. Well, it really depends on where you are in that OPT stage. Now, if the easiest is that you have not filed that OPT application with USCIS, you may have submitted the application to our office to be reviewed and processed, but you now figure out that you won't be able to complete your degree by the date that you're previously said, then that would be the easiest type to fix or adjust that start date, because it's not actually in the hand of USCIS yet. Now, if you already filed it, mailed the complete out, and it's now in the hand of USCIS, it's a lot more to fix that date, to the point that I usually discourage students to withdraw the application and refile it later, because one, the withdrawal process itself is a lengthy process. I have cases where I request a withdrawal for an OPT application, and the acknowledge for that OPT application didn't come until 3 months after that OPT was approved. So just so you know that we can initiate the process to file a withdrawal request, is usually never get to USCIS in time to make the better sense of withdrawing that application and refile it at a later date. So we usually recommend not to change that and just let it go, because even if you don't complete the program completion date, like say a month or two, if you complete it a month or two after the anticipated date, it's fine. You can still let your OPT runs, and you can still use that OPT. It's no problem. But like say if it's if it gets to the point when you have to delay for like a semester or so, you still can use that OPT and still work on your dissertation, for example. It's just like now you're having a harder time because you still have to maintain your status while you're on OPT by looking for a job, and you still have your dissertation in hand to finish. So it's more work on your end, but legally it's perfectly fine, even if you're like a little bit late in completing your program.
And we have a lot of students that end up in that situation where maybe their submission date of their dissertation is delayed a little bit more than what they had anticipated at the time they were applying for OPT. You know, when somebody's applying for OPT and their completion date's being indicated and they're doing it early, you know, 90 days before their completion date, I mean, this is a guess almost. And something could come up where, you know, like there's an unexpected request from the graduate school to make a revision, you know, and so that delays you by a month or two, you know, and that's okay. There's many students who go ahead and begin their OPT and just let it process because it's already filed, it's already out there, and you know, getting USCIS to stop, sometimes it's too late. They've already done their job. I've got a few questions. I know we got several coming in the chat, but I've got some of the questions I wanted to get in there from the pre-submitted questions, and one of those touches on also a question that was submitted earlier. Can we work at 2 places at the same time? And how do you manage if you get an internship or interim job for only 3 or 4 months?
It is possible to have multiple jobs at the same time. Now, I have to ask more questions about the internship that lasts for 3 or 4 months. Is it gonna be after you graduate, or is it like during your program? If you know, the internship is when you have not completed yet, and it's probably possible to get it through CPT somehow, then it is possible to get the approval probably within a short amount of time. But the internship you're talking about, you know, after your program completion date, then we have to use OPT, which, you know, takes a long time, and that needs to be planned well in advance.
Great. So what should I do if I get a job offer, but my OPT application has not been approved yet?
Well, that's a situation that we wish our students don't have to get into. But unfortunately, if you don't have the approved OPT, you can't really start, even if you have the job offer in hand. So that's why we stress over and over that you plan in advance, and hopefully you can get the OPT in time to start the job. So we can't really impact USCIS in terms of, you know, expedite it or make it happen sooner.
And we should probably mention that normally the rule is you have to have the card in your hand, and the start date has to be current. Basically, like if you get the card early, which doesn't happen as much now, great, but you can't start working until the start date that's listed on the card. That is normally the rule for OPT. There is currently an exception that Homeland Security has allowed and USCIS has allowed, because the card production is so slow that if you get your approval notice for your EAD card early, the I-765 has been approved and you get an approval notice, but you're still waiting for the actual employment authorization card, you can use the approval notice as evidence of your work eligibility if the dates are current. And so this is, they have this under the I-9 guidance that they're accepting this exception. And the same thing for, there's a few other things that they've been doing to address some of these receipt notice issues for extensions of work eligibility and the approval process because of this. This is temporary. This will not be a forever rule. This is basically like, right now we're doing this and we're going to rescind this. And once we're back to normal.
Actually, just to add to that point, I think it only applies for application who received it between August and December 2020.
Yeah.
So it's currently, I think there's no other pending application for that. At least, you know, if you have not filed for OPT, you're probably not in that qualified group. But well, who knows? Maybe they will have another section, considering that it takes them so long to receive the application. And it, like I say, if it come back, it's probably temporarily, but we'll let you know if that is the case.
So there's several more questions here. I'm going to ask one more and then I'll kick it over to Chris because I know that there's several in the queue as well. If I go into industry, basically outside of higher ed, is using OPT my only option? How long can I work under OPT in that industry? And what should I do if my time in OPT is about to end?
If you go into industry, OPT is one of the options. If the employer is sponsoring you for H-1B, for example, and they file it while you're in school, and we have cases like that, and you know, the H-1B is approved by the time the students graduate, and which not always the case, because if you work for a CAP subject employer, the H-1B effective date is always October 1st. So rarely that we'll have students that graduate and then, you know, like the H-1B kicks in. Usually there's like a gap between the time that you graduate until the H-1B actually takes effect. So usually I recommend OPT because you're somewhat more flexible in terms of the start date, and it's your application. You are free to work for any employer that you wish, as long as the job that you're doing is related to your major. So you have more flexibility in terms of where do you work and who you work for. Obviously, it's not the only option, but like I say, it's a safe option. But if your H-1B is sponsored by the employer and it's in time for you to start working, that's fine as well. And what should you do if your OPT is about to end? Well, if you are in STEM eligible field, you may be eligible for the STEM OPT extension. And again, if you know H-1B is an option, you can also ask for your employer to file the petition for you as a beneficiary. So.
Yeah, and then there's some cases where students are just unable to extend, and H-1B sponsorship is not an option, and then they may have to explore other opportunities. Keep in mind, even at the end of your F1 OPT period, at the end of that 12 months, if you're not eligible for a STEM extension, you still get a 60-day grace period at the end of your OPT. So you have another 60-day grace period there. You can't work, but you can use that time to apply for a change of status. You can apply to resume full-time study in a new program and get a new I-20. You can transfer your CVIS record to begin a new program at a new school, or you could just prepare to go home. Those 60 days, that grace period can be very beneficial to you as you make plans, and that does happen. But just be aware that sometimes the H-1B lottery, you might not be successful in getting your sponsorship through, or your employer might not be as successful. And if you don't have OPT extension eligibility under STEM, you may have very few options to continue work. But you may need to talk to your employer and potentially even an immigration attorney to explore other options. Chris, do we have other questions?
No, that's it. Actually, I just answered a few in the chat, but
Yeah.
That's all I have. Yep.
And if anybody didn't get their question answered, you know, go ahead and put it back in the chat again in case we missed it, because there were some that were coming fast and furious. I did see somebody ask about working on campus and whether or not authorization. If you're working on campus and you're still actively pursuing your degree, on-campus work is always allowed up to 20 hours per week during the academic year, and more than 20 hours per week during breaks like summer, spring, and winter, as long as you're maintaining your F1 status. And this is specific to F1 students. So I did see that posted earlier, but you don't have to get practical training work authorization to work on campus, nor does your on-campus work have to be directly related to your degree, as long as it meets the on-campus work requirements, which is, generally speaking, located at the University of Alabama, either paid by the University of Alabama or in service of the University of Alabama students. And so that's why working with Aramark here on campus, the food services, is okay. Even though Aramark is not owned by the university, it's still a university service to students. And so working at Aramark is considered on-campus employment. But it has to be on campus. So this is not working for Aramark at another university. It's specifically the Aramark food services here at the University of Alabama. So if you ever have any doubts or questions about that, let us know. A couple of other questions that were in the pre-submitted ones. One, and I think we kind of addressed this a couple of times, but should I apply for OPT if my employer is also sponsoring H-1B?
Yeah, I think Charter already addressed it in its previous section, but we recommend you to maintain your F1 status for as long as possible, because again, the H-1B, you may not get selected in the first round of the lottery if you're working for a CAP exam employer. And OPT, is not subject to a lottery like that. So it takes some time, but it'll get through and you'll get the work authorization. And if the H-1B has any hiccups, at least you're covered. You have some work authorization until, you know, whatever the problem with the H-1B figure. is resolved, and the H-1B can pick up from whenever your OPT ends, or it can be in the middle of your OPT and your F1 will be just completed and you move on to the new status, which is the H-1B status. But maintain your underlying status for as long as you want, as long as you could, and go ahead and apply for that OPT.
And I think OPT, I'll put this out there, you know, so I've worked in the field, it's almost 20 years now. This is the 20th year of me working with F1 students. And so I've seen all these changes over the years. OPT it will always be the cheapest work authorization you will ever get. Dollar for dollar for the length of time you're authorized. It is cheaper than an H-1B. It is cheaper than a green card. It gives you 1 year with the possibility of a 2-year extension if you fit the STEM requirements to work in the U.S. And that is an invaluable benefit. And for me, even if your employer is willing to sponsor an H-1B, and even if they want to initiate it right after they begin, in fact, we usually, and most attorneys will recommend employers to start as early as possible just because they may not be successful in their lottery, but it's so beneficial to you to have that OPT as a backup. And especially if it's not successful, or maybe you start working for an employer and they're just really not that great. Guess what? Your work authorization is attached to you, not that employer. So you can make the switch to a different employer, and you have some flexibility there. And at least during the first year, you can work for multiple employers, and you can do that 1099 contract employment, and you could start your own business. STEM has some different regs, of course, and you can't work for multiple employers when you're on your STEM extension, but at least during that first 12-month period of OPT, of post-completion OPT, you have so much flexibility. And so don't throw that away. Yes, it's expensive, like it's a few $100s to apply for OPT, but it is not as expensive as an H-1B. It's not as expensive as a green card. So anyway, those are my thoughts on it. I have always tried to get people to maximize their work benefits. If they've got it, use it. Well, with that, if nobody else has any more questions, we're going to close this out. Just as a follow-up, I am going to convert the recording. I'm going to have to kind of re-record the first little bit that I missed in the recording, and then I am going to stitch that together and upload it to YouTube. I will then, Trang will share back out with everybody a version of the slides and a link to that YouTube recording so that you guys can go back and touch on anything that maybe was unclear, or whatever else. But anyway, we thank you all for putting up with us for these 2 hours and giving us your attention and asking some great questions. If you have follow-up and you want to, feel free to reach out to us. I'm going to just volunteer Trang. She's going to be available to you whenever you want to answer a million of your questions.
Well, my email address is on the slides all over. So, and I'm going to follow up with you. Oh, well, I am the one that sent out the invitations. You have my contact and my available times right on my signature. So you're welcome to ask any questions, or if you have any concerns, just talk. Yeah. And yeah, get in touch.
And we're happy to help. We know that there's a lot of doubt, a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and we're, I think Trang, Chris, and I all want to make sure that you have a good, comfortable understanding of what you need to do and how to meet your goals. So thank you all, and have an amazing end to your day.
Thank you.
Everyone.